The question I wanted to answer was how much omega-3, because all the time
Yeah.
in practice too, they were like, how much omega-3 should I be taking? What is the dose of omega-3 that we should be recommending in clinical practice? So it
Mhm.
doesn't quite read this way, but the goal of it was as a clinical practice guideline. I just did not realize the scale
Mhm.
that it was going to involve. But
Mhm.
that's what we were trying to write, was something very applicable. But if you are a dietitian, and honestly, any type of dietitian, because it's not specific to athletics,
Mhm.
but that's more the dietitians I would work with. If you were a dietitian working and you were like, how much should I be recommending just for general health? We wanted to try to find a way to answer that question.
Okay, very good. Yeah, that is the ultimate question, and why I struggle with this, because we are on the testing side, and people will ask me how much I should take, and I say, I don't know what your levels are, so I'm not going to tell you, which is
Right.
not satisfying, and it's not something that you can do all the time. But it is not as easy of a question. Like, we kind of take for granted the old DRIs and finding the other vitamins and minerals, and they've done a lot of work on those to determine how much we need. And for the omega-3s, it's kind of newer. There are not DRIs for EPA and DHA, so we don't have that same level of evidence. And we have a lot of evidence, but it's just different. So you really went through and you looked at supplement studies, but as well as everything else that people have tried, food and food fortified foods.
And
Nice.
so our study criteria to be included where they had to have a baseline omega-3 test, some type of intervention, and a follow-up omega-3 test. But that did not have to be the sole outcome.
Mhm.
We compared, like, some of the people that we included had health, like cardiovascular disease, some didn't. We
Mhm.
looked at those separately and there weren't any major differences, so we included everybody.
Good.
I
Mhm.
thought we were going to have like 20 studies to review. Initially, we had 52. I know there are 58 in the final paper, and they had to define what the supplementation protocol was. So as you
Mhm.
mentioned, we included food. Some were fortified foods. There were only, I think, I'm going to say like 9. I just read the paper
Yeah.
again, preparation for
And
this.
what kind of foods were they, just for
So they
examples?
were mussels, chicken, sausages, eggs. Hold on, I did write some of it down. Those were the main ones. Oh, and
Fortified
margarine.
muscle.
Margarine was another one. Yeah, they did fortified mussels. I don't remember what country that was out of because we did list that.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, and so some of the foods were surprising, like the sausages, eggs, not so much, but like mussels, sausages. And then one study was actually with fish itself, but it wasn't like Norwegian teenagers, and they listed they had pretty low compliance.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, but the margarine was the biggest supplementation one.
Yeah.
And then and the rest of them were all for like some type of dietary supplement. And we
Mhm.
included all of those and then looked at what the baseline was, what the follow-up omega-3 index was, what the time frame was, what the supplementation protocol was, and also the country of origin, because they didn't
Mhm.
report a lot of dietary factors. So we did include with that, and if they had any underlying health effects. And you can see that in the big
Yeah.
table. Also,
Mhm.
just throwing it out there, that is a freely downloadable paper.
Oh yeah, yeah. So
Right.
that's fantastic.
How
It's
did you
Frontiers in Nutrition.
how did you define the omega-3 index for these studies?
Great question. So we defined it as if they listed the omega-3 index, and that's what they called it. And that's one of the things we did have to talk about because there were different laboratories. One of our peer reviewers said, not all of the omega-3 index are measured the same way and follow the same protocol. And so you need to account for that in there. So we didn't really do a deep dive, but if they listed it as omega-3 index, that's what they wrote in their methodology. But there were different laboratories, and that could account for some of the variations.
That's usually our big fight, is that it's plasma or it's EPA, DPA, DHA, and
No. We
it's
didn't
so
include anything that
confusing.
was
Yeah,
plasma, DHA, and DHA. It was all red blood cell
that's
DHA.
good.
All of it was that we included in there.
Yeah, that's amazing. You found that many studies with pre-post, because that's something we kind of harp on. So that's the scope of the study. What were your main takeaways?
So one of them was almost everybody was low. The baseline values, with the exception of a few laboratories that, let's say, unorthodox, because I'm not an expert enough to know how
Mhm.
they tested it. The average was, I'd say, about 3 to 5% across regions. That was their baseline omega-3 index. It did almost all of them improve with supplementation, at least EPA and DHA, not as much ALA. And
Mhm.
that the final, like
You include ALA? You included ALA?
we did.
Okay, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, we did
Yeah.
include ALA, which had really minimal impact
Yeah.
on the omega-3 index, almost no impact at all. But we
Right.
did include that because that is the
Mhm.
dietary one. And so
Yeah.
I work in the applied world a lot, and you'd
Mhm.
be surprised how many dietitians recommend ALA as a good source of omega-3, which technically it is, but
Right.
you're not getting some of the benefits of EPA and DHA. So
It's,
we did include that, yeah.
Very important.
it's
It
very
also
important.
studies.
So how many people were altogether in the study? How big is the study?
Which study?
When you
Our-
pool all of your 58 together, you talking about
wow.
2,000, 3,000 people?
So of the 58, because the way we did the tables, we divided it by protocols. I'd have to add them all up from all the different tables. And some of them are crossover because the way we designed our tables separated not necessarily each study, but each protocol. So for example, if one study gave an EPA versus a DHA, we included that as 2 lines. If
Yeah.
they did esters compared to triglycerides, we did that as 2 lines. To go back to the original question, the overall findings and this isn't actually that novel. A lot of other people have suggested this with some more sophisticated calculations, but that it was about 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams of EPA and DHA to
Mhm.
raise the omega-3 index, and it was a minimum of 12 weeks.
Okay.
So that's
From what to what?
So from below, that would be from about 4% to close to 8%, not necessarily over 8%. And I will say we got a lot of pushback from the 8% aiming for it. A lot of when we sent this out said that that was not a true target, like for different peer reviewed. So that doesn't necessarily get it to 8%. That would just be a statistical improvement from below 4%. And so probably just not necessarily a fully to 8.
Yeah, it's an interesting because it's the deficiency level is probably like that 4% target. And if that's the main focus, it's what does it take to get over 4%? This is something we think about a lot. 8%, there's a lot of evidence around it's better than 6, it's better than 7. There is a pretty linear relationship, at least up to 8% with better health outcomes. But in like the more traditional vitamin mineral sense, it's usually just like deficiency and then you're within like whatever, and then it's toxicity. So there's there's not an optimal level defined for the most part.
And one of the questions I have, and I don't know the answer to this, that was just to raise the omega-3 index by a significant amount. I don't know what the amount would be. Like, say you got to 7 or 8%, I don't know what you would do to maintain it.
Usually it's about the same.
You got to keep
that dose to stay at that level. It'll respond. And like that you said 12 weeks, that's usually what we also say for the kind of steady state. So that would be if you're at that level, that's when you're going to know, okay, this is the dose and that's what it gets me to. But it takes that, you can't decrease your dose that much and maintain that level.
Yeah. What did you find with the different forms of omega-3, the ethyl ester versus triglyceride?
So that triacylglycerides were much more effective, and there were a lot of studies, well, at least a few that compared them directly. And so that triacylglycerols were much more effective in raising it than ethyl esters, that you would need a larger dose of ethyl esters to have the same magnitude of increase. The other thing we found is that DHA was much more effective. DHA was actually more effective on its own. That combination with EPA and DHA, and EPA was minimally effective. Now, I understand it undergoes fewer conversions, and I understand EPA has other physiological functions, so it's not like people wouldn't necessarily want to consume EPA. But as far as just an increase in the red blood cells, omega-3, index with EPA and DHA was the most effective that we found, and triacylglycerols.
Yeah. Part of that is DHA will actually increase EPA levels, whereas the reverse is not true.
Right. I understand that. I read a lot about physiology and biochemistry.
Yeah, I saw you put in the Methrol paper about retroconversion and how it's actually not a major contributor to EPA levels. And it's just interesting, even this far into the omega-3 story, some of the basics about the pathway we still don't know, or we're correcting ourselves. It's still really ongoing. You guys really picked out a lot of things that we have noticed or found it through other ways. So it's validating to be able to have you guys completely separately be able to look at this amount of research and come to these same conclusions. It just makes those Those are like nuggets of wisdom that seem to be pretty robust, and it's worth studying, like why is EPA versus DHA showing up to be so different?
Did you see a different effect of food versus supplement?
So the problem with the food is they were really low dose. So
Mhm.
most of the food was less effective, but it was also lower dose. So I think by dose comparisons, it was probably slightly more effective,
Mm.
given the same dose. Like, so if you took like
Per
250
gram.
mil per gram, right, per gram of EPA and DHA.
What's your opinion as to why there's no DRI?
I honestly don't know. So I wrote about that and I was like, there has to be a DRI by now. And I've seen, really important big name researchers write papers, and I cited them saying there should be a DRI. And it's interesting to me because I teach this. I teach vitamins and minerals, and I teach advanced metabolism and macronutrients. So
Yeah.
this is my curriculum. This is what I teach in our program. And it's weird to stand in front of the class and say, here's the DRI for ALA, but we don't have one for EPA and DHA. But then I go into a whole tangent about how important they are, especially now that we publish this paper.
Yeah.
I don't know, and I don't get really involved with government and lobbying, so I don't know enough about it. But I can tell you on the practical end, at least in the sports world and tactical world, we don't care that there's no DRI. We're practicing like there is one.
Yeah.
What do you,
Yeah.
when people ask you what's a healthy intake? How much should I take? What do you say?
So now, knowing this, my recommendation would be at least 1,000 milligrams, so at least a gram a day, 1,500. And I would probably say just like the combination of DHA and EPA, just because I think since there still are important functions of EPA and it's not just omega-3 index,
Mhm.
and I would say definitely, and this is just general health, probably starting out at 1,500. The problem is, and I've run into this a lot, most of the actual supplements that are available on the market are very low dose of omega-3. So you're looking at like 300 to 500 milligrams per tablet, not fish oil, but omega-3. So if you're asking somebody to take 2 grams, they either have to get a higher dose one, which is fine, they're available, but they need to specifically look for that, or they're taking a lot of pills. So usually just for pill compliance, I usually go around like 1,500 milligrams to start, and maybe higher if they're like boxers, military, then we might go like 2 grams a day.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's my recommendation. But I do recommend it to all my classes. And what I was doing in India was I was teaching at the Institute, the Sport Authority of India in Patiala, which is essentially like an Olympic training center. And I was training their future dietitians and nutritionists and coaches. And boxing's huge there. And we talked a lot about omega-3s and boxing. And for them, like 2 grams a day, because high risk of traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We're getting more involved in some of the like American football studies and trying to do work around that, like prevention of bad outcomes when you are going to hit your head. It is going to get hit. You may get concussed in any of those sports, but can being higher in omega-3 help decrease those long-term effects is kind of where it's going, it seems like. It's really great to hear your perspective about kind of the real world, the dietetics world, the sports world, the lack of the DRI. I know Michelle talked to us a decent amount about that, is that was an issue when she was trying to work within the government and or the military, trying to be like, well, there's no DRI, so why should we give it?
Yep.
So that is, it's a real barrier. But the more of this kind of research, we're finding more and more consistency and able to provide dietitians with more consistent evidence-based dosing and recommendations, and people can actually get better outcomes. And then
that's what we are really trying to do, is make some type of, obviously there's so many variabilities, and that's why we chose the scoping review. Again, I had no idea there were going to be that many papers. I thought that when you asked like what was the biggest surprise, that was by far it, just the sheer number of papers that included this.
Yeah.
But that's what we are really going for, is some type of clinical guideline. And we have a lot of charts there too of like how much different doses raised it. Like we had tables with starting and finishing levels, but we also had a lot of tables of this dose raised it by 4%, this dose raised it by 6% over this time frame. And the other thing I wanted to point out, with recommendations, and I'm sure you all could speak to this as well, we didn't really see, I think the highest dose was like 4,400 milligrams that they used, and they didn't report any side effects, at least in the study. So it seemed to be relatively safe in that. So like, to me, the recommendation of 2 grams the biggest downfall with it is just the sheer number of pills, not necessarily the safety concern. But
Yeah.
on that side, like I had to get my mom, so I got my parents to take omega-3s. My
Yeah.
stepdad had some cardiovascular issues. I personally have taken them, but I had to buy my mom children's omega-3s because she
Yeah.
couldn't swallow the bigger pills.
Yeah.
So some of that, and some athletes have talked to me about that as well. So that seems to be the biggest issue, not necessarily side effects, is compliance and swallowing. That's what I've seen on the practical side.
Yeah, your paper's great, very practical. We've all the big points really have been corroborate things that we've found as well. So it's nice to have it all in one place. And it's really
That
good
makes
to
me
talk
feel
to you.
better. I'm not going to say like I was
Yeah.
nervous when you all emailed me and read it, and I was like, oh, I hope it says
Uh-oh.
and I did everything correctly. Well, I think even still writing it, I've been practicing for a long time and writing for a long time, but still, I didn't do this research. It's a review,
Yeah.
so I want to make sure that when I reviewed it, I interpreted everything the best way that I could, and that does make me feel better about that.
You
That's
did a good
great.
job.
Yeah, you did a great job. Great. Thank you so much, Laurel. We'll be in touch.
Thank you all for having me.
Thanks.
Here.